We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Happy 4th of July. That's the day we're recording this. Belated, I guess, by the time the audience is hearing this. Happy Canada Day. That went past this past Saturday as well. So, you know, it's all our country's
Canadians
birthdays.
always trying to steal our spotlight.
Either that or we're just going by the date when, you know, we became the Dominion of Canada, which is the real
you
thing.
guys are just copying us.
Why did you guys wait until the 4th? That's the real question. We're just like, yeah, first of the month, we're the Dominion of Canada now. You guys are like, no, we're gonna wait a few days. Must have been the weekend when it happened.
Something like that. Who knows? So, I don't know.
Did you celebrate, Tom? Did you have a fantastic 4th of
It's
July
like
coming up? It's the morning, but
It's the morning.
let's pretend since people are hearing
I
this.
went
at least the
cycling.
next day. Okay.
And it was an extra long ride today. Out over a very busy street, usually with a very high bridge, but or overpass. I don't know what you would call it. It goes over water, so it's a bridge. And it's usually very, very busy. I don't like going up that road so much because the cars are going I think the speed limit's 45, and no one around here goes the speed limit, so they're whizzing by you. And there's a big shoulder on the side of the bridge, but when you get to the bottom of the overpass of the bridge, it literally disappears. It just goes. It goes from 4 or 5 feet wide to the line for the road is right next to the curb, and you have to go out in the traffic.
It's just what you want.
Just what you want. So, and you're usually coming down, when I'm not with a big group, and today's group was massive. I think there was, in the group I was in, it ended up splitting 3 or 4 times because of the lights and stuff like that.
Okay.
But it was 60 people, 80 people. It was ludicrously large. So, when I'm by myself, I'll be doing 45 miles an hour and I'm coming down this overpass because it's steep, and you just pedal into it and you'll be going as fast as the cars in theory. But with that group that big, somebody's going to ride their brakes and it slows the entire group down.
Gotcha.
So then we have to merge out in the traffic. It's fine. It's hot. It's very hot here, and I'm still getting my legs back. So I came back, and there's something in cycling called bonking, when you basically your body's like, hey, guess what? You don't have enough resources to do what you think you want to do.
Out of fuel.
And I sort of did that. So I'm trying to get over that. I ate something and I'm trying to get past it, but I'm definitely feeling it still. So, and it wasn't even really that long of a ride. It was only 40 something miles. But and I do that on Saturdays usually without a problem. But today I don't know. It just got to me. So we'll see. We'll see. And then today we're going to have, I think we're going to grill if the weather is nice, because it usually rains in the afternoon. But if it doesn't rain in the afternoon, we're going to grill and just hang out with the family. I think everybody's supposed to be home today. So
sounds
I'm
good
excited about that.
All right.
What did you watch, Rob?
Yeah, so I watched The Flash. I did manage to take that in. It's not in any of the large format theaters anymore. I had intended to see
Did you
it.
get the buy one get one free tickets?
Almost, pretty close. It's definitely not in the expensive theaters anymore, but that was fine. Saw it, and okay, so it's really tough to evaluate this movie because I'm not a person who has any sort of belief that I'm able to separate all my prior knowledge from the thing I'm watching now. Okay, if I could watch this movie in a total vacuum, I think I would probably be much more impressed by it because it would be the first time ever seeing any of these concepts, right? But I'm not able to do that realistically. It's
You've already seen Flashpoint happen on the CW.
That's right. We've seen Flashpoint happen. We've seen multiverse movies other than outside of DC. I mean, it's so there's no way to say this is a completely original thing that I'm seeing. Whereas if this was my first exposure to any of those ideas, I'm sure it would blow my mind a lot more. So putting all that aside, I think the easiest way for me to think of this movie is it anywhere near as good as Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? No, not even close. Okay, so that I can quite easily say even if those were the only 2 movies I had ever watched, The Flash is not anywhere near as good as the Spider-Man Spider-Verse movies. So that's the easy part. Now, is it so...
Is that the new one or the first one? I can never remember.
Across the Spider-Verse is the new one. Into the Spider-Verse was the first one.
Oh,
so,
I'm never going to keep that straight.
I know.
Whatever.
And then the third one will be Beyond the Spider-Verse when that comes out. So all very close. But as far as The Flash goes... Does it deserve to be like tanking the way that it seems to be in the box office? No, I don't think so. It's not a horrible movie by any means, but it's also like it's not great. it's not great. I like.
There's a lot of not great movies that have done well. Like I've seen movies and I've been like, why is this so popular? And with this movie, and I think with the Black Adam movie and the Shazam movie and all that stuff, they just suffer from this whole. Whatever they're setting up isn't probably doesn't mean anything. And while that's not really, I don't think that people, if you really talk to them and really got their insight, I don't think they actually care. But I also think a lot of people are like, well, do I really want to go to the movies and spend money on this thing?
Right.
They're looking for reasons to do that, and any reason that gives them to not do it is like, oh, all right, I'll just wait till it comes out on video, or video on demand or something like that, or streaming.
You're definitely going to watch this when it's on streaming, but it's like, So I mean, the issues for me is like a lot of the humor is pretty obvious. Like the obvious joke is made. It's not surprising when it makes the joke, and then a lot of it, like there's. You've seen in the previews, there's 2 versions of Ezra Miller's Flash, two Barry Allens, and a lot of the humor is from, like, one of them is very annoying, and, like, the whole thing of we're gonna call out in the movie itself that he's annoying and everyone knows he's annoying and he knows he's annoying doesn't make him not annoying. Like just hanging a lampshade on it doesn't stop it from being the thing that you're calling out. So there was a lot of stuff that I'm pretty sure I was supposed to laugh at that I was like, it was just kind of annoying. And then we all know Michael Keaton's Batman is in this. Yes, it is. It is the 1989 Batman. That's the world they've gone to, and that's who he is. And it's like, They did the thing where, he says a line that's right from the 89 Batman, and then he stares at the camera for 5 seconds solid because they're expecting that the audience is cheering while he's saying that. So, of course...
Which is what they did with that most recent Spider-Man movie, where there was all these weird breaks in it. Right. I'm like...
hold
why doesn't nobody say anything?
Hold for applause. Now, of course... I'm seeing it in the non-big theater, not anywhere close to opening night with, I think, 2 other people were in the theater there. So, we were not
social distancing.
We were not hooping and hollering for a solid 5 seconds. So that all felt a little bit awkward. But okay, the main thing that you've heard about other people criticizing, and I have to say the CG in places is just god awful. And there's the whole thing of like, okay, when he's in the chronodome, which is like the way that he actually chooses how much time passes forward or backward while he's inside the Speed Force, they're like, okay, we meant it to look like that. We meant it to all look like plasticine, not real people or whatever. I'm like, okay, I guess that's a way around not having Henry Cavill on there to actually film anything, and things like that just made everybody look like really bad rushed CG. Like, honestly, worse than the CW Flash CG, like substantially worse than the CW Flash CG. So, okay, but apparently that was intentional. But there was another section that's been called out right at the beginning of the movie where he's not inside the Chronodome yet, and it still looks like that. So I'm like, okay, you guys just didn't have money or time or whatever it was, and you made plasticine people, and it looks really bad. So, like, that's a problem. That's just flat out a problem. Yeah, and then as far as, okay, like, Ezra Miller's Barry Allen showed up in a crossover with Grant Gustin's Barry Allen on TV. So they exist in the same multiverse. And in the CW version of The Flash, they basically had it pretty simple, right? You had multiple Earths, 52 of them, well, 53 when there was Earth X, but 52 multiple Earths. Barry Allen could travel between different Earths, and then each Earth had its own timeline. So you could time travel within each individual Earth. That was like, okay, as far as that stuff goes, kind of organized and easy to understand. And so you had the Ezra Miller, Barry Allen meet up with a Grant Gustin Barry Allen at one point. Okay, so they crossed Earth. We got it. This one is like, no, that's not how the multiverse or time works at all. We've got our own way of how the multiverse works in this movie, and I'm like, okay. Which again, like, watching it in a vacuum wouldn't be a problem, but you've already established at one point in the past that anyway.
That's a problem with the whole having TV series that aren't linked
Right.
to the movies. It's like, it's not that you don't that you really have to have the same rules all the way through or whatever, but it is annoying when you're like, wait a second.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes you out of the movie. It does.
A little bit, right? So that's why, like, yeah, it's tough, right? Because I don't think I can separate my mind from everything I've viewed before, so there's problems that way. Yeah, the CG stuff was, I don't know what they were thinking with some of that, because it's just really distractingly bad. So, okay. And I mean, it's not as though
you should watch it on your phone.
Yeah,
that'll make it better.
So, did the emotional stuff hit? I mean, not nearly as much as I'm sure they wanted it to, because there's a bunch of distractions going on. Was Michael Keaton's Batman as cool as you're hoping? Nah, it's kind of maybe a little too much time has passed.
I'll be completely honest with you. None of you people, most of the people who listen to this podcast, I would say, but very few remember as clearly as I do when they announced Michael Keaton as Batman. We all went, well, that's a terrible idea.
I didn't think it was a terrible idea, but it was just...
Oh, my God. Everybody I know was like, Michael Keaton?
Oh,
Michael
I see. When it was originally done, way back. Okay.
Yes,
like
way
when we heard
back.
about it
and then he came out, and I'll be honest with you, he came out, and it was like... It was one of those things where you're like, it's good.
Mm-hmm.
It was good. It was good in spite of the fact that his face looks weird in that mask. It just does. It just does. Like, Robert Pattinson is by far, in my opinion, the best looking Batman in the mask. You know, by far. He just has, he looks completely different, and he looks like Batman to me, as far as in the mask. Michael Keaton? No, I'm sorry. Nostalgia aside, when it actually came out, I spent the entire movie going, hey, what's up with his face?
Well, so anyway, last thing I'll say about The Flash is there's Supergirl in this. It's the first time we've had Supergirl in the DCEU.
I've only seen pictures, so she looks awesome.
She looks fantastic. I liked the performance. I don't mind one bit whatsoever that she now has dark hair instead of blonde hair, because, like, Clark had dark hair, so they're cousins.
Who cares?
That seems to be perfectly fine to me. That didn't bug me whatsoever. There's not nearly enough of her in this movie. It's like, I wish there was a whole lot more of her. They zoom past everything with her. I guess she's there just because they couldn't have it be super. I don't exactly know what was going on there. And then the whole thing of, does this give you a nice clean reboot? We're all ready to go into the James Gunn version of the DCU now.
Of course not.
Absolutely not. That's not the way it was originally written.
How long has this movie been in production? Like 10 years?
It was supposed to come out in 2021. That was when it was originally supposed to come out. That was well before James Gunn had been hired and the whole thing. So, I mean, it is absolutely not a clean break. There's not nearly as much. I mean, there's barely any world hopping in this, because again, they're like, that's not the way the multiverse works. So anyway, yeah, it's tough to give this a really hearty thumbs up in any way. There's spectacle in it for sure, but the CG lets it down. So okay, yeah, I mean, I can see why this isn't any sort of like everyone's telling you to go out and see it, and you'll watch it on streaming and you'll have a perfectly reasonable time. The end. What did you watch, Tom?
So my wife was out of town this weekend. She drove. She had a long drive thing to do for one of my sons who needed a ride to a camp, and she was basically gone all weekend. So the first night she was gone, I watched Nope.
Yes,
which is the
Jordan Peele.
Jordan Peele. I'm going to say horror in quotes, because it's...
Yeah, if you look up the genre, it's listed there, but I completely agree.
Not exactly
I know,
why.
It's not exactly horror.
Wasn't exactly scary for me. And almost... There was like one scene I thought that was kind of scary in that.
That's right.
And I'll be honest with you. I've liked a lot of his movies and stuff, and this movie is perfectly fine. This one feels a lot like, if you're into M. Night Shyamalan, at least the early stuff, this feels very much like what's the alien one? Signs. It kind of feels like that. You're kind of like, this is all right. I don't know that it's what I expected, or it's not exactly what I thought I was going to get. Yeah. And there was some leaps of logic in this thing that I was like, wait, I don't know how you got to that. Okay. I mean, I'm glad you got there, because, but there's also some logical things that are happening. I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's how that would work. Yeah. Like any of that.
But the movie's a metaphor, Tom. It's not really
For metaphor, and then there's the whole thing with the monkey. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't understand why that was in this movie.
Okay. Oh, okay.
At all.
Oh.
Like, why was there the monkey part?
That was some of my favorite stuff.
I'm not saying that was some of the scarier stuff, honestly. I mean, I thought that was some of the more interesting things.
And it's an ape, not a monkey, but you know.
It was chimpanzee, right?
Yeah, that's an ape. They're not monkeys. They don't have long tails.
Okay. Listen. I'm having a hard enough time getting pronouns right these days. Don't make me have to get pronouns right for freaking monkeys. All right? Close enough. All right? Ape, monkey, just whatever. So, yes, that part was interesting, and yet I was like, why are you here?
Oh, okay.
Why is this thing happening? What is going on here?
Part of the metaphor, Tom.
The metaphor, that's fine. Whatever. So it was fine. It wasn't my favorite. Okay. It was fine. Yeah. If I think I liked the previews more than I liked the movie itself. And I also watched Black Phone, which is what you watched. You mentioned it.
I did
last week and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, Rob mentioned that. It was pretty, and it was good. It very much kind of had that Silence of the Lambs sort of thing feeling, but not nearly as complex or.
Oh no, it's not.
Yeah, interesting. I would say, or. Yeah, but it's got that sort of
I like
slow burn.
When you're talking
sort of
about what type of horror, that's why I mentioned that, because it's not the, gore or torture or that type of horror or jump scare horror or anything like that. It's on the more psychological side.
It's really interesting when you have a character who basically wears a mask the entire. You never really see their face. You never really see their face the entire time. Kind of like with Dread, and most actors, from my understanding, are very opposed to that simply because,
that's right.
You're...
Actually, I think the agents are more opposed than the actors are.
Yeah.
So,
that might
someone
be true.
as established as Ethan Hawke, he's like, I don't have to have my face on screen all the time.
Yeah. And he was great, of course. And in fact, you're right. Like, everybody I thought was great in this movie.
Yeah.
I thought the whole thing was great. And for those of you that didn't live through the 70s, because it's set in 1978.
Right. Yeah.
For those of you, I would have been 7 years old back then. So this is a tiny bit before my time. But, by early 80s, when I was at that age, it wasn't that much different. And while movies tend to overestimate the amount of bullying and violence that went on in middle school and elementary school from that era, it's really not that far off. I'll be honest with you. That place was a little bit more violent than I expected it to be.
Well, and of course, in a movie with a limited runtime, when they're showing you every event, right, then of course it's going to seem like it's happening constantly, whereas in real life it's spread out by months or whatever, but they're going to show you each of those events back to back to back in the movie that's only 90 minutes long. So.
Right. Yeah. But some of the things that happened in that movie happened to me.
Sure.
As far as when I was growing up. Like I had bullies, and I had a friend who was a guy who lived in my block, and we weren't close or anything like that, but he went and talked to someone. He did the hame thing that happened at the very beginning of the movie, where the kid had some bullies, and another kid kind of stuck up for him, and I had somebody do that for me. And so a lot of it felt, as far as the setting, felt very, very real.
Felt very believable. Yeah. I mean, the bit of the supernatural in there that I mentioned that, that you're familiar with now, but I don't want to spoil for anybody. I mean, aside from that, this is a totally it could happen type of scenario. Yeah. It's not, and that's what I mean, here living in British Columbia, Lower Mainland, back in the early 80s, we had Clifford Olson, who was very well known, serial kidnapper and murderer. And it's almost, I mean, in a way, I was almost surprised this movie wasn't based directly on him. It wasn't. Yeah. It was based on other people who were in California and that at around the same time. But it was almost exactly that story.
So I'll tell you, one of the things that we don't really understand now, because we have so much access to news, and there's the news agency that are constantly looking for things to talk about because they are running 24 hours a day, and there's multiple of them. One of the things that we don't understand is back then there was an hour of news twice a day.
Often a half hour.
They had to fill up an entire, like they had, a couple of minutes for national, a couple of minutes for local, a couple of minutes for, international or whatever, weather, sports, and blah, 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 blah. Right. So we didn't really hear as much as we hear right now. We don't know what was going on, but we would get strange commercials that clearly indicated that somebody knew that there were problems going on in society. Okay. Do you know where your kids are? Stranger danger. Oh, yes. Kids, your kid should be home. Don't let your kid get into cars and stuff. I remember seeing these commercials going, what are these, like, what are they talking about? When I was a kid, I was like, what is all this stuff? What are they talking about? Now, actually watching this movie and thinking back, I was like, there's so many times when I was just alone.
Yep.
I was just at a park
or
by
at the very
myself.
least, not with an adult.
No adults to be seen as far as the eye could see. And maybe a couple of kids with me, maybe just walking around by myself. Yep. I mean, riding my bike around neighborhood by myself, common occurrence.
Yeah.
And watching this movie made me feel, as an adult looking back, going, Jesus, why did it?
No, I mean they got the setting, they got the realism in it. So yeah,
it's very good.
I was impressed.
It's a very good movie. It's short, like Rob said. It's short. My wife I started watching that movie. I was like, oh, she won't get home because she's supposed to be home that evening. I'm like, I looked at the time and was like, oh, it's less than 2 hours. She's supposed to be home about 8:30. At 7:00. She probably won't get home till 9 because of traffic, blah, blah, blah. She gets in right when he's messing with the lock.
Oh, okay.
Tell you, I was like, oh my God.
Break the tension. Okay.
I was laughing. So when you guys watch that movie and get to that part, and it's on Amazon Prime for those of you, you can stream it for free. All right, let's get to the podcast. It's AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us a question at avrant.com. Go to our website, find our show notes, as well as our links to our Flickr album, where you can follow along with the pictures we're going to be talking about. There's also links to any and all of the products and articles that we'll be mentioning as we speak today.
That's right.
Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can see our live recording session.
Yep. Couple of heads.
That's worth. I don't think Twitter works anymore, right? So are we still doing that? I'm saying Twitter?
I still have a thing over there, and I still scroll through tweets as long as I'm allowed to. I never reach my limit because I don't have most of the people I follow have left now.
For those of you that don't know, that are like, oh, what are you talking about? I don't know either.
Yeah,
okay?
No,
all I know
the temporary limit on how many tweets you can view, which, you're scrolling through tweets, it goes pretty quick. So
Elon Musk is a very stable genius. That's all I have to say about this. He's very stable. And he's
never made a mistake. Not one.
Never. Never borrowed more money than he could reasonably pay back. Definitely is not going to torpedo.
But I am there. I'm at First Reflect, so you can find me there if you want.
So, Rob is Rob at avrant.com. Twitter's at First Reflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. Don't bother finding me on Twitter because I don't check it. All right, we want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, which will send you to a PayPal donation site. We want to thank Steven for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Steven.
Was it Steven or Stefan? Because we have a Steven further down. We also have a Stefan who writes to us sometimes. It might be a Stefan.
Hold on, let me check it again.
Whoever it was, thank you very much for your financial support.
No, we're going to find out who it is because I don't want to say your name wrong, my dude, or do that.
I mean, I'm not sure.
I'm scrolling.
I know we did have a Steven write to us this week.
Stephen.
Ian, there we go. That's probably the fellow who wrote to us then. It all lines up.
It's not Stefan. Ooh,
I've changed it in the show notes, so I credit the correct person when I write them later this week.
I tried to change it, and then whatever.
I already did.
We also want to thank our patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon.com is a service that you can sign up to be a monthly contributor to our podcast. We have 132 patrons. So thank you to all of you.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can sign up to be an automatic monthly donor and perhaps re-sign up because, it ticked way down this month at the beginning of the month. So I think a whole bunch of people's credit cards expired. So we're down to 132 as of this recording, and hopefully we'll get ourselves back up and reached for that 150 one day.
Woo-hoo. Yes. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through
all the things.
I don't know what's happening this week. There's been a lot, but then again, there's been a lot every week. So we got Vince, who hopes Rob and all of his family members have been safe during the Canadian wildfires.
I'm happy to report for the moment, the lower mainland BC was spared most of the bad stuff. We have fires to the west of us, fires to the east of us, fires to the north of us, and somehow the winds were blowing kind of southeasterly, and it didn't really cover the lower mainland in smoke. So I've been spared for the moment, as has most of my family, but I do have family over in the Toronto area, so they've been dealing with heavy smoke over there. So yeah, but for the most part, we've made it through just fine and haven't been like actually in any of the wildfire areas. Thank you, though.
We notice a gratitude from Paul Vince, who appreciated our suggestions for his great room setup last week. Mm-hmm. Stephen and Chisholm?
I don't know how they pronounce it. There's no R in there.
Chisholm? I don't know. Anyways, it's in Australia. Yes. And he's been listening since the Dina days. Yeah. Stan and Rohan. Rohan. Anyways, he really appreciated our sanity check after he started to spiral, having read too much about taking measurements, despite his room being untreated and highly reflective. Thanks to our advice, he took his C2 OLED out of the power saving mode to the subwoofer crawl for a single SVS PB1000 Pro sub, reran Audyssey, and manually set all the speakers to small. Manually increased the subwoofer output a bit until a bass sweep sounded more even, and biggest of all, stopped warring so much and just started enjoying his setup. Despite having bought a UMIC 1 mini DSP, he didn't bother to take any measurements. If and when he can, one day convince his wife to allow some bass traps and acoustic panels, maybe he'll try taking some measurements then. So
I'm happy to hear that you have put that out of your mind too much. So yes, I shall say the names one more time. Vince H, since we had two Vinces. So Vince H, Paul, Vince F, Stephen, Stan, and Rohan. Thank you all very much for your notes of gratitude to us. Your notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So in the news, just days ahead of Paramount Plus becoming Paramount Plus with Showtime, because you know how great the streaming services are going right now. And combining.
And this one isn't exactly a surprise what they did, given what's been going on.
The streaming services had to pull a Max plus Disney Plus and Max and Disney Plus.
Both of them, what they've been doing.
Oh, okay. And removed existing shows completely for the purposes of tax write-offs.
Yeah.
The Game, Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, Queen of the Universe, and surprisingly Star Trek Prodigy have all disappeared, with no other way of accessing and watching them.
Yeah.
Star Trek Prodigy had already been greenlit for a second season back in 2021, and apparently CBS Studios will complete its final post-production with the intent to sell both seasons to some other broadcaster or streamer. Well, hello, sci-fi. The first season was actually broadcast on Nickelodeon, as well as streaming on Paramount Plus, but has been completely removed from both outlets. This is just dumb. This whole thing is dumb.
I mean, the Paramount Plus is the whole, like, we're the home of Star Trek. This is where you come for all the Star Trek series, all that have ever been and all that ever will be, but not this one. For some reason, This one, we just can't afford to keep one season of an animated Star Trek show, which actually turned out way better than I expected it to. By the end, I was like, hey, that was actually pretty impressive by the end of that season. So it's a shame that it's like there's no way of watching it right now, at least in the US. It's still here on Crave, I checked, up in Canada, but we'll see how long that lasts, because I'm sure there was a limited time on the license. So yeah, pretty strange. And I mean, selling off that one show to some other broadcaster or streamer, it's weird times. We're in weird times. I don't like it.
Well, okay, so let's do a reality check here. There are a ton of shows out there that have never that were broadcast and then never saw any sort of other sort of release. Yeah. So it's not like this is unprecedented.
No.
You know, for those of us that I missed it, but I'll watch it on streaming, and now it's not available on streaming, and that seems like it's unfair. Why wouldn't it just be available someplace? I mean, I agree. I think it should be. If somebody is making money on streams, then it doesn't seem like it should be that hard to just profit share with the people who made the show, rather than, you know what I mean? Like, I know that I've seen it was a TikTok or Instagram or maybe even YouTube, somebody who was like a writer for many TV shows would go through every month and open up all their checks,
right?
Their residual checks, and tell you how much they got from each show. Reruns of Seinfeld paid me, $500 this month, or $33.05. You know what I mean? And they'd sometimes be ludicrously, 98 cents.
Some are literal pennies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't see. And this is simply my ignorance on this. How they can't come up with some way of making all this stuff available, especially when it's new. Like, This is when you should be putting this stuff in the contracts. Like, it's going to streaming. there should be some way of making sure that both you can make money and they can make money. Not like
that's why they're on strike. All the writers are on strike right now. That's why. That's why the actors might go on strike along with them.
They should. They should.
I'm kind of hoping they do because that'll definitely get things moving.
And remember, way back when Scarlett Johansson sued Disney or whatever it was, my basic position was like, this has to happen.
Yeah.
This has to happen because if not, the studios will just be like, we get to keep all the money.
Yep.
We already paid you. We get to keep all the money. And the fact that you don't get as much money because we've changed how we're distributing these things, and your contract doesn't cover these other things. Too bad, so sad. That's not how these things should work.
Oh, the message that the Paramount Plus had put out about for the creative people who won't be getting any residuals from these things that are gone from Paramount Plus in the blink of an eye, it was, that was pretty terse. It was pretty cold. The message about we wish you well in your future endeavors. It was like,
that's great.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
We've decided not to pursue candidates in this position anymore. Yes, you have. You just decided not to consider me, which is just say that. Just don't.
But whatever the number crunching they did, I mean, obviously they get more from the tax write-off on Star Trek Prodigy than they do from just leaving it where it is. Apparently, the math worked out that way. But really, so bad. That much? Was it on? You're saving that much more than whatever revenue you're going to generate?
I was thinking about this earlier. What was the movie that they had completely done? Was that Batgirl movie or
yeah,
Supergirl movie or something like that?
It was Batgirl, yeah.
Batgirl that they just wrote it off. I'm so mad. Everybody should be so mad about that.
That one they can't even sell to another outlet because in order to get the tax write-off, it has to never release in any form anywhere. So
somebody needs to get a job at one of those studios simply to get that movie and then leak it. That's what they need to do. All right. MetaQuest has decided to get into the subscription service game for its VR headsets. I love subscriptions. They're my favorite. VR. Oh, God. MetaQuest Plus.
Surprise.
I know. It's quite simple. For $8 a month or $60 a year, you get to add 2 VR... This is a misnomer here. You get to add 2 VR titles to your Quest library in the first of every month. You don't get to choose the titles, though. So you don't actually get to add titles. They're selected by Meta. For July, subscribers get Pistol Whip, which I already own, and Pixel Ripped 1995. I don't know what that one is. Pixel Whip. Pistol Whip is great.
Okay.
That's a good game. That's a fun game.
Mm-hmm. It's already in your library. You bought it.
I already bought it. It is great. It's a good game. I would highly recommend that one, and you should just buy that game rather than whatever this crap is. In August, the games will be Walkabout Mini Golf and Mother Gunship Forge. That's a dumb name. I think that the mini golf game got good reviews. I remember seeing that, but whatever. Anyways, you can keep and play all of your MetaQuest Plus games for as long as you remain a subscriber, and if you cancel but resubscribe later, you'll regain access to all your previously accessed titles. So does that mean that now that you get Pistol Whip, you have Pistol Whip forever?
So if you're on the subscription service, So it's the thing. It's very similar to PlayStation Plus was and Xbox when it was Gold back before it was Game Pass, right? Where it's the titles are available. You do have to click a button to add it to your library, because if you don't click the button to add it to your library, you just don't have that title in your libraries and you can never access it. So you click the thing, you add it to your library. As long as you remain a subscriber, you can play Pistol Whip. As if you stop subscribing, you can't play it anymore. If you resubscribe, right, you left and then you came back, you can play Pistol Whip again. That's how it works. So you don't own it. You do not own it. You are subscribing to it.
Until July 31st, you can get the first month for just $1. MetaQuest Plus is available for Quest 2, Quest Pro, and the upcoming Quest 3, but it is not available for the original Oculus Quest headset.
Which is what I have. So I can't do this anyway.
Oh, well. What will you do?
I will boo-hoo.
I have not put on one of my VR headsets in about a year.
Oh, dear.
I do like it. It's just, I don't have time.
Yeah.
I had a lot of time when COVID, where lockdown was happening. I played a lot. So we missed this news back when it was first announced, but we might as well mention it now. If you were disappointed with the restrictive licensing requirements for Audyssey MultEQ-X software, they sort of offer a solution now, the MultEQ-X Pro.
That's right.
First and foremost, the functionality is exactly the same. There's anything for you can do in MultEQ-X Pro that you cannot do with the regular consumer version of MultEQ-X. The differences are all entirely to do with the licensing. With the regular version of MultEQ-X, you have to link it to a Microsoft account. It cannot be ever transferred. And once you use it with a particular Denon or Marantz receiver, it'll only work with that one receiver. So it's a license. It's one license, one user via the linked Microsoft account, and one AV receiver. That's it.
Yeah.
But with the MultEQ-X Pro, this is breaking my brain.
Is the name? I'm sorry. It's MultEQ-X
With
Pro.
the MultEQ-X Pro, you can download the software directly from Audyssey, but you do not have to link it with a Microsoft account. Pro users can resell licenses to their clients and customers, but each license still gets locked to a single AV receiver.
Yeah, so to make that very clear, because your diction was a little unclear there, you do not have to link MultEQ-X Pro with a Microsoft account. So that was something that Pro installers very much complained about, because it is a little bit of a hassle to create a new Microsoft account. It's not always the speediest thing. There's a weird thing where you have to wait a day to enter your address, and you have to enter your address in order to get this to work. So you got to set those things up in advance. So there was complaints about that from custom installers and that who are using this. So can we please not have to link it to a Microsoft account? And then if we want to sell it to our client, they can do that. They can then basically turn it back into the consumer version by linking it to their Microsoft account and going on their merry way with that single license. But it makes it a little bit easier for professionals.
Okay. Pro users get phone support from Audyssey staff, and there are discounted prices for buying licenses in bulk. So what's the catch? You have to buy a minimum of 5 licenses. If you already bought a MultEQ-X license, you can contact Audyssey and have that transferred to a Pro account as long as you buy enough additional licenses to meet the 5 license minimum. Each individual license costs $200, so chalk up a quick grand.
That's right.
But if you're buying at least 5 licenses together right away, there's a 10% discount with larger discounts at 10, 20, and 50 simultaneous purchases. 50.
Yes.
Holy moly.
It's 20% off if you buy 50 of them all at once. If you're a big custom installer.
As somebody might. I mean, do you have to immediately link them to something?
No, that's the whole point. You don't have to link them to a Microsoft account anymore.
You could just decide that MultEQ-X is going to be around forever. So you could buy 5 of them right now.
Sure.
And then
use them for 5 future AV receivers. You can go ahead and do that. Yeah, because you aren't they don't ask for your business license or something. You can go directly. You don't have to buy it through the Microsoft store anymore. That's another thing. You can buy it directly from Audyssey. As long as you're getting 5 licenses totals, you can have the Pro version. You don't have to link it to an account. You can sell it to somebody else. But once you have started using it on a particular AV receiver, it is now inextricably linked to that one AV receiver, that particular license. So that restriction is still in place.
So right this minute, if you hear it in time, until July 7th, all MultEQ-X and MultEQ-X Pro licenses are 25% off during their 4th of July sale, which means that if you didn't hear it in time, just wait. There'll be another.
There'll probably be another one at some point.
Or Labor Day sale or whatever. Whatever is coming up next.
Yep.
Okay, whatever. I don't care about any of that crap. Let's go on.
Yes.
Let's go look at some questions here. Dazz. We skipped Dazz last week because we hate him. Specifically to make him suffer because he's our least favorite.
This wasn't a purchasing decision, so I felt okay leaving it 1 week. Well, the other one
specifically
was
Rob
purchasing.
doesn't like you, Dazz. That's what happened.
I editorialized it that way.
That's the way I would read into this if I were you.
Must.
That's what must. Dazz, not to muddy the waters, but between Rob's responses 2 weeks ago and then Aaron's Audio Corner clarifications 2 weeks ago when Lee was here, Dazz is pretty sure he went cross-eyed at some point.
Fair.
Well, Lee does that to a lot of people.
It wasn't Lee's fault.
I'm pretty sure we can blame Lee for this. In fact, you should send a scathing email to Lee at AVRant.com.
True.
This whole discussion about anechoically flat speakers being measured in a real room, what that in-room measurement should look like, what should be EQ'd, and what shouldn't, it's all just throwing him for a bit of a loop. So, can we summarize and clearly state what the heck he should be aiming for in his room? He can fully grasp the idea that, at least according to Harman's research and experimentation, and just logic too for that matter, the goal for a good speaker in an anechoic chamber is to measure flat and provide a signal in equals signal out performance. Then you bring that anechoically flat speaker into a real listening room, and we should expect to measure a gradual rise in the response as the frequency sweep goes lower and lower. The deep bass might have a significant rise in it. That depends on the room. And all of that is descriptive, at least coming from Harman, not prescriptive. That all makes good sense to Dazz.
Yeah.
Good. But from there, nailing down exactly what is being recommended gets a bit murky.
Yes. Yeah, that is fair, Dazz. That is very fair.
Okay. No, I don't. This is clearly Lee's fault. Everybody seems to agree that it's good to acoustically treat your room. Not everybody agrees on the nitty gritty, down to the last details, specifics, and it very much depends on the specific room. But everybody seems to agree that room treatments are a good thing. I agree. I don't think that audiophiles all agree with that, but yes, I think all reasonable people who believe science is a thing and not magic also agree. If you do treat your room, some people say go ahead and EQ your system full range, but other people say only EQ your bass, curtain off your EQ, and just rely on the room treatments to take care of the frequencies above the room transition frequency. And to further muddy the waters, if you don't treat your room, the same conflicting advice about whether curtain off or EQ full range is out there too. What's the real deal? Can we state it clearly and logically? Okay, first of all, I just want to say that from my personal perspective, this whole idea of gating things off, and I understand why people say it. I think that it is, I think it's a on paper makes sense, but in real life doesn't make a difference thing.
Okay.
So let's just say that. So Rob will explain in more detail here about why people want to gate things off or whatever. But the idea is that you want your EQ can do the most good down low and up at the top frequencies. It shouldn't really be touching anything because it doesn't really need to, and it can make things worse or whatever. My thought is anything that it might do on the top end is minimal, therefore who cares if it does it or not?
Sure.
Just like, it's just going to, if your room is treated, it's going to look at that and go, that stuff's pretty good. I'm not going to touch that. And then it's going to gate itself off for the most part. It might do a little something up above the room transition frequency, but for the most part, I think it's just not worth my time or energy. And I think sonically, you're going to, if you A/B it, you're not going to go, oh my God, it's so much different. It's no different. It's going to sound exactly the same. So, and Rob and I have been moving further and further in this direction that there is just far too much emphasis in this hobby on what we call in cycling marginal gains.
Yeah.
Marginal gain. Oh, I just want, I just want to get a little bit more, weight off my bike so I can go a little faster. You're 45 pounds overweight. Your bike is not the problem. And you're not going to be able to feel the difference in the bike anyways. Same thing with most people's home theater. You could do all they want to do, like, should I should I upgrade my speakers? You live in a reflective box with windows all over the place, no light control, hardwood floors, no room treatments anywhere, and you're worried about upgrading your speakers. You should not upgrade your speakers. And that's sort of where I live in this whole room this room correction thing, where people are like, should I gate it off? Should I not gate it off? It doesn't matter. It literally will not make a sonic difference to you, so don't worry about it.
Right.
Go
I
on,
mean,
Rob.
for the crowd that is very into home theater, it's like part of your identity, right? It's a thing that you identify with. I can completely understand on the psychological side, like this desire for certainty, this desire for consensus. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, people want that in most things in life, and it's no different in home theater. There's a desire for that. So, I mean, I think the baseline answer that we have to give to this particular specific idea of should we equalize above the room transition frequency or not is that there is no single answer. I have to lay that groundwork because unlike video, where at least in video, we have some really clearly defined, very objectively measurable standards that you can either choose to match or not, but it is binary, right? It's not, I'm going to kind of match it. No, it's like you either match those standards or you don't, and it's binary, and it's easy to delineate whether you've completely matched the video standards or not. We just don't have that in audio. And there's the whole argument of the people saying, well, that's part of why Harman is doing all this research and part of what they want to establish. But if you actually talk to the guys at Harman, they're like, well, unless we are going to like draw up plans for one or more standardized rooms and say these are the only rooms you are ever allowed to listen to anything in, it's impossible. You just can't. There are things that are room dependent. And it is completely out of the realm of reasonability to think that home theaters are ever going to be so strictly defined that there's like, even if there were a dozen standardized rooms, like that's just never going to happen. You could maybe see that in a professional setting of some sort, a standardized mixing studio or something like that. It's conceivable. But for the home market, no, we're just never going to have that be a thing. So this idea of, okay, should we equalize above the room transition frequency or not? So much depends. And that's why we can't just give you a blanket binary yes or no answer, right? If we go by Harman's research, there's a whole bunch of caveats in there, which is they are talking about a specific type of speaker design that not all speakers adhere to. And Harman isn't going to tell you that all speakers should or must adhere. They're saying if we take this type of speaker design, then we can descriptively go backwards and say, well, here is what people prefer room-wise, equalization-wise, if we use this type of speaker. But if we don't use that type of speaker, it's different. So this is why we can't just point to a single equalization graph and say, that's the room response graph, and that should always be your target graph, no matter what else is going on. We can't do that because there are different types of speakers out there, and there are definitely very different rooms out there. And it changes when you put those things in combination with each other. So yeah, I completely agree with Tom on the side of, there are kind of two scenarios that are going to happen when you measure above the transition frequency of your room. You're either going to have pretty darn uniform response across your seats, which is kind of rare, especially the higher and higher you go in frequency, the rarer that's going to be. But it's kind of rare to begin with. But you're either going to have fairly uniform response across your seats, or you're not, right? So, I mean, of course, there's going to be degrees in there, but you can kind of delineate those two things. Now, if you have reasonable uniformity across your seats, then it's not dissimilar than when we're EQing the bass, right? If it's uniform across your seats, then yes, if we increase the loudness of these frequencies and decrease the loudness of these other frequencies, that's going to happen across all of the seats if it's uniform. And so then you can make the argument, okay, so it's not terribly problematic if we do that, right? If we notice there's a dip or a hump in the frequency response somewhere in the speaker, as long as it's uniform, we can go ahead and equalize that. On the other hand, if it is non-uniform across the seats, well, then the system isn't going to touch it, because then it is going to make it significantly worse in one seat while trying to make it better in another. And it just ends up going, well, I can't really do that. So really the only scenario where this, should you equalize above the transition frequency or not, really takes hold, and it's a totally plausible situation in a home, is, I mentioned this when I was with Lee, if you take a really small cluster of measurements, right? You really only measure about the size of a human head, and you keep all of your microphone measurement positions really tightly clustered like that, then you can end up in the scenario where, okay, amongst the measurements you took, because they're all really close together, there was enough uniformity that the automatic equalization system did something in the higher frequencies that made it significantly worse in the seat to your left and the seat to your right. That could happen, and some people do that because, like, this is the seat I care about, all of my measurements are really tightly clustered. In that scenario, if, like, it's kind of anachronistic, right? Because it's like, well, why would you focus so much on that one seat and then also say, but I do care about the seats to my left and right, so I'm not going to equalize the higher frequencies because it might make them worse. It's like, well, why would you do the tight cluster then? So you're either going to do the tight cluster because you don't really care about the seats to your left or your right, or you're going to do a wider measurement area, a larger spatial average, in which case the system is probably going to discover that, okay, well, I can't really equalize the treble because it's not uniform. So end result, exactly like Tom said, you're not really going to notice the difference unless you're taking the tight cluster and you only care about the one seat. But, then, okay, you're going to use the profile 2 when you do care about the seats next to you, and you're going to take a different set of measurements, which probably aren't going to equalize the treble nearly as much anyway. So in the end, I think it's an issue, exactly like Tom said, it's more on paper than it is in reality, that sort of sorts itself out. But okay, if we end up in this scenario where you realize maybe you're equalizing things manually, so then you're saying, okay, and I'm only taking a limited number of measurements or something like that. And you're going to say, well, to be on the safe side, because I did things manually, but I do care about more than just the one central seat, I'm going to avoid this mess, and I'm not going to bother equalizing the treble because I don't really know what that's going to do in the other seats.
That's manual anyways. You're not gating anything off. I mean, yeah.
You're just you're choosing not to above there. So yeah, I think end result is, it's not going to create a problem unless you're in a weird situation that probably would demand a second set of measurements anyway. So that's my end result take on should you EQ above the transition frequency or not.
It's one of those on paper things. I'm telling you. So when you do apply EQ, this is the second and final question, full range or not, what is the target curve supposed to be? We've explained why it isn't just the average in-room response that Harman described when they measure their M2 speakers, but if the target isn't that, what is it? And why isn't it just a perfectly flat line? And if it's just a gradual rise in the bass and we follow the curtain off your EQ and only EQ the bass below the room's transition frequency advice, which I don't think you should, do we actually need any room correction system at all? Why not just EQ our subwoofers and nothing else and be done with it? Again, can we state it clearly and logically for him? So at reference level, you are, the idea is that it's the bass and everything, you can hear everything about equally, right? That's the idea. That's
a pretty rough equally as far as human hearing goes.
Hearing, right. So
our human hearing is closest to linear when everything is playing at 85 decibels.
Right. So when you lower the volume past that, then suddenly your EQ curve changes dramatically because of your ability to hear things linearly.
Yeah.
So what is the target curve? The target curve is that it is linear at a volume. Okay, whatever.
I mean, so kind of close to linear, not exactly a flat line like a ruler.
Because you can't hear linearly, the idea of curves of equal loudness come in because so you're like, what should be the EQ curve? It changes based on volume.
Yeah.
It changes based on volume. And that is so that you hear, it should be linear. It should be a line. But you can't hear a line at every volume level. So therefore, not everything sounds like a line. Therefore, you want everything to sound like a line. And that's where we get into these problems where people are like, oh, well, I like to bump my subwoofer up 5 dB. That's because of what volume you tend to listen at. And you don't use dynamic EQ because somebody on Reddit, if that still exists, the other day that was down too.
That's down, yeah. Many of them are.
You can't, you don't, they told you not to use dynamic EQ, so you don't use dynamic EQ, and now
you bought a brand of receiver or processor that doesn't offer it, which there's many of them out there.
Like Dirac doesn't have curves of equal loudness and stuff. So
Anthem doesn't have it, surprisingly.
Yeah. So I know. So yes, it should be a line. And if you had perfect hearing and could hear every sound at any volume just the same as any other sound at that same volume, then you would EQ to a line. There would not be any curves of equal loudness, and that would be it. Now, you may prefer, because of whatever has gone on in your life, hearing loss, your desire to have a car with a lot of subwoofers in it has tainted your ability to think what is good bass. Therefore you like to have extra bass. All that changes. But if you were to ask me what is the target is a straight line.
Well,
but you just can't
to
hear it.
To some extent, yeah. That would specifically be with a caveat of the sweep playing at 85 decibels.
Right.
85 decibels at your seating location, at your measurement location, not just 1 meter away from the speaker or something like that.
Right.
And then even then, to get a little bit in the nitty gritty, I would argue that it isn't just a complete ruler in order for it to perceptually sound.
Right.
Like even at 85 decibels, like every sound that you hear is equal in volume. Right. So that's where I come back to. So if you're just trying to pick a drawn line that somebody put in a book or on a website, well, we really can't do that because, again, this is dependent on, to some extent, even in the bass, to some extent, the speakers that you're using. Certainly the positioning within the room, and then the room itself, predominantly the room itself, makes a difference on perceptually, even at 85 decibels, what is actually going to sound linear to your ears at your seat. So, again, it comes back to we can't just give you a flat, this is the target always. There are variables in there that demand that if your goal is to just hear this 85 decibel sweep as though it sounds to you like all of those frequencies are the same volume, you aren't going to end up with a ruler flat line.
No.
That's just not going to happen.
Even at, like you said, even at reference volume,
That's
I think that it's never going to be, like I said, in theory,
yes,
if you could hear everything perfectly at perfect hearing, not golden ear.
No, because even when we say that 85 decibel figure, that's where our human hearing is the closest to linear, but it isn't still. It still isn't linear. At 85 decibels, our hearing is not a ruler flat line. So that's where I come back to. It ends up being some trial and error. What should your target curve be? Well, the target curve should start at the sweep playing at 85 decibels at your seat. That's the starting point of what the volume is of what the sweep ought to be. And then there will be some trial and error of you adjusting that target curve, going back and forth a few times to find with your speakers in your room at your listening position at 85 decibels, what this sounds like all the frequencies are the same volume to me. There's variability in there. Then, with that as your starting point, we want something that can apply curves of equal loudness because we aren't always listening with the average level at 85 decibels. Yeah. That is kind of rare. So I still want curves of equal loudness being applied there. And if you have to do that manually, well, that's going to be a whole bunch more trial and error because then you're going to go down to a 75 decibel sweep and you're going to do trial and error again and get back to where it sounds to you like all of those frequencies are playing at the same volume, which is going to be more of a rise in the bass as you decrease the volume. So that is about as clearly and logically as I can state it for you. It's certainly not that the target is a flat line at all volumes. Far from that. Right. That's well established with the Fletcher-Munson curves of equal loudness. And then as far as even at 85 decibels, why isn't it a ruler flat line? That's because human hearing is not linear there, and there's variability depending on your room.
Yeah. So you would start with, letting the EQ, your room correction, do its thing.
Do its thing at default, yep.
At default. And then you would turn on your dynamic EQ if you have it, or whatever curves of equal loudness. And then you would listen to it and go,
that's right.
That doesn't sound like it has enough bass for me.
That's right.
And then you can make adjustments based on that.
Based on the target curve, and then back and forth, rinse and repeat. And I would honestly, in that part of the calibration process, I'm not even worried about what the graphs look like. No. I am going by my ears at that point because that's what matters. Yeah. Right? Yeah. If we gave you a graph that you can see with your eyes and you match it to that and then you go back and play the sweep and it doesn't sound like the sweep was equal in volume, what have we done? Like, are we supposed to say, no, that's what visually the graph should look?
No.
Who
because
cares?
Your own hearing is different than everybody else's. We're just talking about generalities at this point.
That's right.
So at some point you have to go and you have to adjust, or you can be like me and just be like, whatever's close enough.
Close enough. Yes.
Yeah. How many times in other than Rob, who sits around listening to sweeps to make sure that things are what they sound like? I mean, the only time we ever really care about this stuff is when there's an explosion and we're like, well, how come that wasn't loud enough?
Yeah.
That's the only time we really care.
In the recording it wasn't. Yeah. But last thing I want to say about this is when you are playing that sweep for this part of the evaluation, I would make it a kind of slow sweep because the room resonance is part of it too. And that changes very much depending on frequency. You're getting much more room resonance in the lower frequencies than you are in the higher frequencies. So if you only do a very rapid sweep that just goes pew, you're not going to be able to pick out what the room resonance is adding to that, at least not very readily. So in this part of it, the listening part of it, evaluation part of it, do I need to move some stuff up and down in the target curve? I want to play a pretty slow sweep so that I can really notice what the room is adding to it.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Infinite Gary. So if you go to a full-size IMAX cinema, every speaker in there runs full range, correct?
That is correct.
Good. Okay. There's no bass management going on, and the subwoofers are strictly playing dedicated low-frequency effects channels and nothing else, correct? Apparently.
That is, my understanding of how it is all mixed, yes.
And then, by default, if you use an IMAX Enhanced AV receiver with an IMAX Enhanced Ultra HD Blu-ray disc, and the IMAX Enhanced listening mode does a similar thing. All speaker channels set to full range with the subwoofer output only playing LFE and nothing else. They let you manually change that now, but by default, that's what IMAX Enhanced wanted to do in our homes, right?
That is correct.
So if you left it like that, in what way would it actually sound different? Is it even noticeable? What would sound better? What would sound worse? Well, you would be missing a bunch of bass, basically.
Well, you would have much less uniform bass across your seats.
Well, I think you'd be missing a lot of it, too, because anything that was mixed into one channel, like in your surrounds or whatever, that would just be gone, because none of us have full-range surround speakers. Even Infinite Gary does not have full-range surround speakers. But even if you
did have full-range speakers in every position,
it would be uneven, yes.
You're going to have non-uniformity. Yeah, so the whole point of why we do the speakers all set to small, bass management, setting up multiple subwoofers. The whole reason we do that in our homes is the idea that from seat to seat, we don't have this wild non-uniformity. A lot of those issues go away when your room is huge, like an IMAX auditorium.
IMAX theater, right.
Right? So that's why they can do that in an IMAX auditorium. A lot of those issues go away. Yeah. But even if you've got a large home theater, it's not the size of an IMAX auditorium. It's just,
remember, 20 hertz... 20 hertz note is like 55 feet
That's
long.
Right, in wavelength. And you know what? Even in an IMAX auditorium, that's still an issue. You can't really go all the way down to 20 hertz.
I've been to a lot of IMAX theaters that are very wide, but not very
front to back deep. Although there's quite a bit hidden behind that screen that we don't see.
That might be true,
It's really heavily padded back there. But regardless, the notion that they had of bringing the same lack of a bass management system into the homes, because that's the way it's done in the IMAX auditoriums, that was a big mistake on their part.
You know what? I'm not going to blame them for that, though.
I can see where that came from.
I see them saying, like, I see somebody saying, can we do what we do at the theater, like, in a receiver, and some engineer going, we could, you wouldn't really want to, and then all they're like, oh, okay, you said we could, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but you really want to, okay, just do it.
Get the same experience at home that you got in the theater. On a technical side, I can see where they came to that. But so would you notice a difference in sound? So, I mean, in Gary's scenario where he really only has one seat, and he doesn't care about uniformity across more than one seat, even there, I would argue that you might, because you're going to have some of your 5 speaker channels where if you were to just run them full range and play a sweep through them, it wouldn't sound linear even in your single seat, because the room is interacting with the bass and it's making it non-linear even at your single seat, just like how you can have a single sub that is not positioned optimally for your one seat. You never did a subwoofer crawl. You just plop the subwoofer down in a random spot. You play a bass sweep through that sub and it doesn't sound nice and even at one location until you've done a subwoofer crawl. So given that you're going to set up your 5 speakers, not where they're best for low bass, but where they're best for the imaging, even there, in one seat and one seat only, you're going to have issues where if you played a full range sweep, it wouldn't sound right. So that could definitely be noticeable at home. We would always bass manage, even for IMAX Enhanced.
Yeah. Paul has attempted to follow our advice for installing absorption panels, but he really wanted to keep his existing posters and artwork if possible. We had mentioned how the panels on your back wall behind your seat seem to be at your seated ear level, so he hung his posters above them, high up on the back wall. I'm scrolling down. I see. Yes, he has done that. Mm-hmm. I think that's great.
I like it.
Would we say he needs to replace those posters and the artwork with acoustic panels? Absolutely not. I don't think so. I think this is fine. I mean, let's put it this way. I'm sure there's somebody out there who will be like, oh, you've got to be able to. No, I don't agree. I think that this is fine. You have, and I just got in a big discussion with my parents about the fact that they're complaining about how how loud their open concept kitchen area is.
Okay.
I'm like, I've been telling you guys for years to put some acoustic panels. We don't have any room on the wall. I'm like, any place is good.
Above the cabinets, there's always that gap above your cabinets between the top of your cabinets and the ceiling where nothing goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of places they could put them, and they decide they're not going to do it. But in your case, like, I think that people who speak in absolutes and are like, okay, no, that whole back wall needs to be, and those posters are just reflective, and you gotta have some balance in your life.
Sure.
And you like the posters? I like the posters.
Me too.
And I think that you should keep those posters up there. I think this is a great compromise.
Yep.
I like it.
No, you've done the right thing, which is absolutely... So the specific reflection that we're worried about is the one that's at ear level, and you've treated that, right?
You have.
If you added more absorption panels above those, or if you got the images that you already have on your posters printed onto fabric and made printed posters, if you did that, that would address some of the overall room decay times, but it wouldn't be the specific vocal reflection that can like muddy your dialogue intelligibility. That part you've already treated with the panels that are at seated ear height. So, could having more panels up higher be of some minor benefit? Well, sure. But is it going to be a really noticeable, like, you have to do it? No, absolutely not. And I would weigh the aesthetics over that in this instance. On the other hand, if your posters were at ear level and the panels you had installed were above them, I would be encouraging you to flip that. But you've already done it the correct way. So I say keep it the way you have it.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to sneeze again, I think. Hold on, we'll see.
Could be.
He hasn't added corner bass trapping yet, but he's going to. We can't see it in the photo, but there's a Martin Logan Dynamo subwoofer in the rear corner behind his couch. But for a couple of the other corners in his rooms, it would be easier to put bass traps in the bottom corners rather than the top corners. Does that matter? Nope.
No. Yes. Thankfully,
throw them in there.
For this again, your bass trapping, your corner bass trapping, that is about overall room decay times. And when we're talking about corner bass trapping, I'll just mention again, like, we talk about corners because that's efficient. You can cover a lot more surface area and create a wider air gap behind the panel if you're straddling a corner, say. You can just do that efficiently without having to buy a whole bunch more insulation and a physically much larger panel. You can cover more surface area and have a wider air gap and therefore treat down into lower frequencies more efficiently. It doesn't literally have to be the corners. It's not that the corner is special. It's just geometrically efficient to put it in there. But since we're just talking about lowering overall room decay times down as low as we're able to, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's the floor to wall transition, the wall to ceiling transition, the vertical corners, up high in the vertical corners, down low in the vertical corners. The bass is going everywhere. It's reflecting off of every surface in this room. And we're just going to try and have some coverage wherever it's convenient to do so. We're not talking about a specific reflection at the vocal range that's going like, I went from the speaker to this wall to your ear. That's not what we're doing with bass trapping, so literally put it anywhere.
So he's still using a Harmony remote plus hub. His gear is all in a separate room, so it's vital that he's able to control everything without line of sight. Things are okay for now, but he's worried his Harmony will stop working at some point. He was happy to discover that his Apple TV 4K remote works just fine without line of sight and without any setup at all. It is able to control the volume on his AV receiver, but there's no way the little Apple TV remote could fully replace his Harmony because it has so few buttons. Is there any chance AV receivers will start to provide full functionality for all the connected devices and maybe use their app controllers so that line of sight remotes aren't necessary? Welcome to the wonderful world of eARC and ARC.
And HDMI CEC, because that was the whole idea.
That's the whole idea there. So do I think they're going to add something else other than that? Absolutely not. It's gonna be HDMI CEC. Yeah. And nothing else. They're like, we already did that. We got HDMI CEC. See, it's right there. It works perfectly. It works.
Yeah, I mean, as far as
10% of the time, 100% of the time.
Yeah. As far as getting everything to synchronize, turning on and off with your AV receiver's remote, I can't say that's 100%. It is supposed to work. It does work sometimes. Can't say that always works through HDMI CEC. As far as doing basic controls, right, of, okay, I'm going to turn the television on and have it go to, well, just the input for my AV receiver because it doesn't really need to change as long as I'm using my AV receiver as the hub. And then on whatever source device I have, play, pause, fast forward, rewind, that type of thing. Like, tends to work okay, until the moments when it doesn't. It tends to work pretty okay. But look, harmonies have glitches once in a while too, right? Or it gets out of synchronization with the power on state of a device or something. It's not as though harmony is 100% foolproof either. So it would make the most sense if you want to have the ability to have all the controls for your AV receiver, that it would be the AV receiver's remote that you use, because that's the only one that's going to have all of those buttons. And then I've never seen a modern AV receiver remote that doesn't have, just basic power on controls, basic fast forward, rewind, play, pause controls. So, we're kind of already there. You could maybe give it a try with your existing AV receiver and see what CEC can do in that way, just as an experiment. We've said like, hey, kind of great if, I don't know, Denon went out there and got all the Harmony stuff from Logitech that they're not doing anything with and started packing in Harmony remotes with their AV receivers, but I don't honestly think that they're going to do that. So
I just can't understand how somebody can't just buy that technology from them. I mean, obviously I don't know that anybody wants to, but I don't think they'd sell it anyways.
Yeah.
Because
So I would have to say, what's out there right now is the Sofa Baton X1, which, if you don't demand of it that it do any home automation stuff, which Logitech Harmonies were able to do, and they did reasonably well getting in there. If you don't demand any of the home automation stuff, if it's just about controlling home theater devices, the X1 does a decent job of that.
Yeah.
I'm not so worried. I know it's become sort of the popular to just rag on the thing because it's not ideal and it's not as good as the Harmony remotes were. But if this is just about controlling your home theater system and replacing a bunch of other remotes and doing it without line of sight, it works pretty darn well. So I will say the X1 is okay for that. And then, of course, there are the app solutions where you could do things that way as well. So if none of those work, you basically are going to something like a Control 4 or a Crestron system. That's where we are these days.
And that's unfortunate because those
a little bit
the prices of those things
there is a price delta there for sure.
Yeah, it's so big. But I agree. I feel like the internet has decided that the Sofa Baton is not good, and I don't think it's
fully
fair,
agree with that,
and I don't agree with it. I mean, mine's in a box. I have not opened it up because my Harmony still works. But believe me, the minute my Harmony starts acting up on me, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And everything that, and Andrew has updated his review over at AV Gadgets a number of times. And the Sofa Baton has gotten better with every update of his review. And the home automation stuff. And frankly, if I were Sofa Baton, and it's not a big company like Logitech,
no.
If I were them, I wouldn't care about home automation either because of such a small. They might be vocal, like the Save the Snyder verse bot people, but they're a small percentage of people. Most people just want to be able to control all of their gear from a remote that works.
Yeah,
and
it
most
does
of
that. It does that
just
pretty
fine.
Well.
Yeah. Carl had a chuckle when a local news station ran a story about a passenger on an airplane using a portable projector to throw a movie onto the overhead bins during a flight. Funny to see that as a headline on a news broadcast, but Karl has to admit he travels a lot and hasn't seen anyone do that before. Honestly, if they're using headphones, he wouldn't mind. And also, note taken. What do we think? I think you got to be real careful on what you project up there.
There's that.
Not everybody wants to see whatever movie you might be wanting to see or anything like that. And also, it's not a flat surface and it's not a white surface.
I'm certainly not worried about the geometry and color accuracy when I'm doing this, but also, like, it seems like in the image they showed, like the cabin of this airplane is pretty dim, which it would need to be.
Yeah.
So is this like a flight where people are sleeping and do they want someone with a projected light source going up there? Like, there's a whole bunch of I could see complaints about this as well. So I don't know, go ahead and project it on the seat back in front of you, but then is that really particularly different than just opening a laptop?
That much bigger than a laptop. Yeah, I agree.
That's right. So I'm not sure I'd be the most thrilled for someone on my flight besides myself to do this. I can see a lot of ways that this could go wrong pretty quickly. But the little portable projectors with their little LED light sources, they can do this sort of thing on a battery.
I was on a couple of very long flights, and let me tell you something. The staff there have been abused so much in the last couple of years. I mean, I was really careful, not careful, but just I'm usually pretty nice to people because I worked in the service industries, different service industries for a long time. And I know that it doesn't take much for somebody just to make your day by just saying hi or good morning or whatever.
Or thank
My
you.
kids were like, how come you keep talking about people's hair? Because if I see somebody that has clearly, if they picked out something or done something that took some time and some thought, I try to comment on it. They got nice shoes. They have, they've got like fancy hair, or they did their hair looks like it was done or something like that, or long eyelashes, or whatever the stuff. I try to comment on that simply because they clearly care. They clearly took the effort to do it,
Right.
and by saying, "Oh, nice hair," or "I love your hair," or "Oh, those are cool shoes," or something like that. Usually, that's all it takes, and they're like, "Oh, God, thank you," and then they smile and they have a good day. Projecting stuff on the ceiling of an airplane isn't likely to get you that same effect. Okay, so if as long as you don't care whether or not you stay on that airplane, project away. If it were me, I just watch it on my phone.
I would watch it on my phone or my laptop, yes.
Nick just watched Avatar 2, The Way of Water on Disney+. He thought it looked great. And he noted that the fast movement and action scenes looked natural, clear, and didn't have any of the typical choppy 24 frames per second look to them. Was he seeing it in high frame rate on Disney+? He's certain it was in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, but what about high frame rate? And if Disney Plus doesn't have it in high frame rate, does anyone else? It's also available on Max, and of course, you can buy or rent it on Apple Movies, Vudu, or Ultra HD Blu-ray. Which source offers it at the same high frame rate as the movie was shot? No idea. Go ahead, Rob.
Unfortunately, precisely 0 of them.
There you go.
There is none, and some of this you're like, wait a second, the Ang Lee movies came out, and they were in high frame rate. How come Avatar wouldn't have been? Well, Avatar was shot at 48 frames per second per eye, because they were actually using stereoscopic
3D,
cameras
right.
for 3D, and each of those cameras was running at 48 frames per second. And there is no home release format that supports 48 frames per second. They'll support 24, 30, 60, but not 48. So it's not compatible to show it exactly the way it was shot at 48 frames per second. It's why we also didn't get any high frame rate releases of The Hobbit, because the Hobbit movies were shot at 48 frames per second by Peter Jackson. We didn't get high frame rate versions of those at home either. So the Ang Lee movies were actually shot at 120 frames per second per eye. And we didn't get that at home. In fact, we didn't get that outside of, I think it was 6 theaters in the entire world that were capable of showing it at 120 frames per second per eye. But we did get a 60 frames per second version at home because the formats are able to support that, at least the disc format. So yeah, 0. Is there a chance Kaleidoscape could offer it? That would be your best bet. But as far as I'm aware, they're not offering it in high frame rate at this time either. That's as far as I could tell.
Yeah. Still on my phone, waiting for me to watch it. So even though he wasn't seeing that 48 frames per second high frame rate at home, the 24 frame per second version he was streaming still looked great, and with the fast moving action scenes looking clearer, more natural, and less jerky and blurry. Does that indicate that shooting at a high frame rate, even if the playback still ends up being 24 frames per second, is actually the more important part? After seeing the results, why wouldn't the rest of the film industry start shooting at higher frame rates? Is it just the added cost of needing more storage? Christopher Nolan thinks that you're a jerk for even suggesting this.
Physical film only for that, man.
He is an auteur, and he will shoot at 20 frames per second if he wants to, because that's what the director's intent is. There's going to be all kind of reasons why people don't want to shoot at or upgrade technologies. Cost could be one of it, but I think, it's just like an artist with their, why don't you paint in watercolors? Because I'm I'm comfortable drawing, or I'm comfortable with oil-based paints or whatever. People get comfortable with the cameras that they use, the lenses that they use. They don't necessarily want to start switching things up, especially if they're older and have been doing it a long time. So I'm not trying to be ageist here. I'm just trying to point out that this is how people work. I'm the same way. Once I get comfortable with the technology, somebody says, oh, there's a new program that does the same thing but better and easier. I'm like, I'm good. All right, figure this one out.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, on the post-production side, increasing the frame rate even just to double, like they did, 48 instead of 24, that's a significant increase in cost, not just from storage space, but they are moving that data around a lot on the post-production side. And when you're having to move double, triple, quadruple the amount of data just by sheerly having more frames, that's not an insignificant thing when it comes to cost and time and storage and all of those things. So that's some of it, why the studio wouldn't be demanding that every movie is shot in high frame rate. I think the bigger issue, though, is you have to light everything differently when you shoot at high frame rate. The exposure time for each frame is shorter now, especially when you're going all the way up to 120 like Ang Lee was. And you'll notice that things look significantly different in those Ang Lee movies, where some shots, they didn't quite nail it, because this is new. You can't blame the cinematographer for not knowing exactly how much light they ought to have on that set for this scene, because this is very new stuff that they're dealing with. And there's a significant learning curve that would go on there. And it would be different from 48 to 60 to 120. All of those require different lighting. Some lens things might change as well in there. So there's a big learning curve going on there. And all of that means time and money. So there's not going to be a tremendous push from the studios for sure. The studios want to save as much money as they can everywhere that they can. And all of this, unless it's a big time director like James Cameron or Peter Jackson or Ang Lee, who has enough clout to say, this is the way I want to shoot my movie. It's going to cost more, but because I already have made my name in this industry,
right, I'm going to be able to make you money back. Don't worry about it. Yes, James Cameron can film in 1 billion frames per second if he wants to.
He can do what he wants to do. But even there, didn't shoot it at 120, shot it at 48 for whatever. And part of that was the lighting, because he was doing a lot of stuff for real, despite how CG everything ends up looking. It was doing a lot of stuff for real in camera, and a lot of the lighting was an issue when you tried to shoot at the higher frame rates. So that's a big part of it. Now, the argument for, on the technical side, are there benefits, even if the end deliverable is all the way down at 24 frames per second like we're used to? Are there technical benefits to shooting at a higher frame rate? Yes, that's exactly what the people who convinced Ang Lee to shoot at 120 frames per second showed him. They're like, even if you're going to finish this movie at 24 frames per second, if you're shooting it at 5 times that rate, you have all these options that you don't have shooting just at 24 to begin with. You can combine frames to make the blur exactly how much you want it to be, because you have 5 separate exposures, and you can overlay them if you want to. You can put 5 of them together to create one frame, or you can pick 1 or 2 frames out of there and make those the frame for that 24th of a second, rather than each of them having to be used in the scene. So there's many different things that you can do, all kinds of speed ramping things that you can do, just like shooting at a higher resolution than the finished product. Now you can crop in, or you can manipulate the image more readily because you started with a bigger canvas, and it's easier to shrink a larger canvas starting point down to a smaller deliverable than to just begin at the deliverable and then have no room to mess with anything. So you're absolutely right that there are benefits to shooting at a high frame rate. I do think we'll get there, because all the digital cameras that they're shooting on now, they're all capable of shooting at higher frame rates. But it's all the other learning curve part of it, and then the post-production cost that's going to make the studios not so eager for filmmakers to do it.
Yeah. Jack, going well off the beaten path with this question, but he figured he'd ask. Jack is a pole vaulting coach. I have 2 sons that have pole vaulted.
Yeah, so I'm sure he heard you say that.
He's used to using iPhones and iPads to record his students' jumps so they can analyze and adjust, but frankly, it's a bit of a pain to use, and if they don't basically have a 1-to-1 ratio of coaches to students, they might miss recording a jump, or a student might have to wait until the coach is ready to record. Well, he recently went to a camp where they had a GoPro camera mounted on the wall. Its HDMI output went into an HDMI to analog video converter, and that went to an old Magnavox HDD
hard disk drive.
Recorder. Standard definition only at 60i at best, but it was able to just continuously record onto its hard drive in a 2-hour loop. And any recording within that loop could be viewed in slow motion or frame by frame at any time. It was the best. Students could keep on performing their jumps, no waiting around, and they could review any of those jumps using a regular remote control on a 50-inch TV. So we'd like to set up something similar, but hopefully with higher resolution and quality, something that could do 1080p or 1080p 120 or 4K 60 would be great, but he hasn't had any luck finding something that's closer to consumer pricing rather than costing thousands and thousands of dollars for like a professional sport broadcasting equipment. So He had thought he found something promising with security DVRs, but their recorded frame rate is always capped at a low number. Any suggestions that all would make that we could make would be helpful. So the problem here is the viewing immediately, like on demand, because the recording is easy, like biking, GoPros, in general, but many cyclists, especially around here, because they're retired and they have money to burn, they all have cameras front and back, so that way if anybody hits them or does anything stupid, they can shame them online or use it in their defense of when somebody says like he came out of nowhere, which literally, dude, you'd be shocked how, I mean, maybe you wouldn't, but I've seen like personal video from people who were like, this guy went into court and said I came out of nowhere, and you can see the car just coming up on him from like a million miles away, and you can see the guy driving with his phone in his hand, right at the steering wheel, and just runs the cyclist down. And he's like, he came out of nowhere. Yeah, he did. So it's the ability to watch it back in real time, which is the problem here. So I don't see any reason why a GoPro can't be used as the camera, and then you would just have to hook it up to a laptop, I would think, and then somehow do it that way. But I don't know, Rob, what do you got?
Yeah, so I mean, you can just go out to a Best Buy and buy some stuff. I didn't have a thought that was any dissimilar from that. You can have GoPros set up so that you aren't literally having to hold an iPhone or an iPad. Right. You can have their Quick app. It's the GoPro Quick app, so you can have that installed on your iPad or an iPhone or on a laptop. That gives you remote control of the GoPro, so that's one handy thing there. You don't have to physically, be right in the vicinity of the camera, and then on that Quick app, you can view it in slow-mo or frame by frame, but that isn't tremendously dissimilar from what you're doing right now, shooting it on the iPhone or iPad. It's not exactly what you were talking about, where it's just shooting in a continuous loop, and you can just go over a TV and view it that way. You are still like controlling when the GoPro is recording. It's doing that one recording, and then you're viewing it back on probably a tablet through basically editing software in the Quick app, and you're doing it that way. But it isn't like somebody's still going to have to monitor that the next recording is being made for the next jumper, right? You can do that remotely, at least with the app. So I think it's a slight improvement on the current setup, but it's not exactly what you're talking about. So the only other thing I can think of, Blackmagic Design, which is a company that, they are focused at the very least the prosumer, and then very much into the professional market. They do have some devices, which this would be a computer-based setup. You would be doing this with a computer, but they do have ones that more or less do what you're talking about. You would have multiple cameras potentially hooked up to the Blackmagic Design or directly to the laptop, and you can set it there. This is basically broadcast equipment. That's what it is. And we are at least in the high hundreds, if not low thousands of dollars to look at some of the stuff that they can do. This would be like their Ultra Studio products, some of which have a viewer built right onto it. It's meant to kind of go into a rack or right beside your system, and they have a little LCD monitor right there. But these are SDI-based systems, so some of them have HDMI inputs, at least, so you could feed a GoPro camera with its HDMI output directly into it, but a lot of them are the SDI connection, the professional connection that you're using there. So, that would be about the best I could get to. It's not cheap. These are the ones you'd be looking at are at least into the low thousands of dollars.
So there's the Blackmagic Design Ultra Studio HD Mini. And it's $545.
Right.
I don't know, and I can't see the back here. It does have an HDMI output, so you would be able to
connect it to a monitor, at least a regular TV. Yeah. But there's some conversions that are going on there with the cameras. You would need to connect it to a computer to have full control. It's not exactly going to be the simplest of setups. I can't pretend to be an absolute expert on this, but without going to like full-on television broadcast equipment for the slow-mo playback type of thing, that's about the closest that I could recommend.
So, I'm thinking about things like Plex, right? And I don't quite know how all of that works, but if you were to set up a Plex server and then record to that, and then could you give people access to it wirelessly so they could watch stuff on their phones?
Yeah, you'd need to set up some like transcoding automations. So there's going to be a computer in that setup for sure.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, the file wouldn't be there until the recording is completed.
Right.
So you're still doing stopping and starting recordings, unlike that Magnavox setup that he talked about, which is just a continuous 2-hour loop. I think that was the convenience he really liked about it. So
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, you're still kind of close to that quick app with the GoPro because you're still starting and stopping the recordings in order to view them back in both of those cases. Yeah.
Chris. To start, Chris has recently noticed a rattling sound coming from his 24-year-old Paradigm 12-inch ported subwoofer. It is the first bit of troubleshooting. As easy as removing the amplifier back panel on the back of the sub and having a look inside? No. The first bit is to pick it up and shake it.
Okay.
That's the first thing I would do.
Not
is
always
pick it up
easy
and shake it.
with a subwoofer. They're kind of
well, I
heavy
mean, 24-year-old, there's just no way that this thing is that big. I would think 12 inches, whatever. I would think that you could at least tip it up on one leg and go, then rattle it around, see if anything in there is rattling around. That would be my first guess. That somebody usually. It's a ported sub. If you have children or have ever had children.
Yes. Did a Lego go in there?
The Legos and toys and stuff often end up in there. And if that's what you're looking for, then yes, you could take the amp or the driver. Sometimes the driver is actually easier to get out than the amp.
Occasionally, yes. I do know on a lot of Paradigm subs, though, they cover the screw holes for the driver on the front, kind of glued on there, some kind of fascia that they put over there, just to give it that nice clean look. So that isn't always the easiest access on some subwoofers.
Did they do that 24 years ago, though?
I don't know. Well, that's just it. I don't know the exact model of the sub. I didn't get that information. So yes, those would be the two access points for looking inside for sure, would be the plate amplifier on the back, which usually has the screw holes accessible on there. It's pretty rare that those are covered up, or the screw holes on the front to take out the driver. One or both.
So after Rob sent a quick email reply, Chris unscrewed the amplifier on the back of the sub and quickly spotted the problem. There were some bits of foam that had come loose at the front of the cabinet, and when he touched the backside of the driver, it made the same noise he was hearing. So it's quite obvious that the foam surround of the driver has started to fall apart.
Yep.
There's a cover on the front of the sub that makes the screws holding in the driver inaccessible. So obviously Rob knew something I didn't know at the beginning of this question. It seems to be glued in place, so is this something that he should take to a local shop to have repaired? Dude, how much more value can you get out of a 24-year-old sub? I mean, if it were me, I'd be looking for an upgrade or a replacement. Because there is no world in which I think that you should spend more money on this thing. It's not
replacing the surround on a driver is a common thing. This is not unexpected.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult. I mean, unless you're very comfortable working with adhesives and all that, that is something I would personally pay somebody else to do.
I would too.
Because the people who do that all day long, it's not a big deal for them. For me, it would be a big old hassle, and I would almost certainly have adhesive spread places I don't want adhesive spread at the end of the process if I did it myself. So if I were to have the surround on a driver replaced, I would pay a local repair shop to do it.
I would too. I would not do it for this subwoofer. And let me explain to you why. This is not the only thing that's probably wrong with it at this point.
Well, yes.
Yeah. So if you're going to spend any money on this, you got to be expecting that you're going to start spending. You're going to start spending bad money or good money after bad, basically.
Could be.
Could happen. Could not. Could get another 24 years out of it. But, subs aren't that expensive, and SVS always has sales. He called his local dealer where he had bought a Paradigm sub back in 1999. They said the cost of the repair would anywhere from $90 to $360, depending on exactly what they find. But they cautioned him that the sub was probably near the end of its useful life. They said the next thing to go might be the amp. Do subwoofers really have a limited lifespan? And do you just have to replace the entire thing at some point? Everything has a limited lifespan.
Well, it's not immortal, but...
Nothing is immortal, especially things with... I mean, the fact that you got 24 years out of this thing is amazing. So, could it last another 24? It absolutely could. There's no world in which I would not spend $500 to get another sub.
Okay.
So
I mean, they're probably correct in that if anything is going to go next, it would be like the capacitors, because capacitors do wear out over time eventually.
Yes.
They're a little bit like a rechargeable battery cell, right? They're charging and discharging, charging and discharging, and they don't last. They don't keep the same value forever and ever and ever. Eventually, capacitors need to be replaced. Now, in some amplifier designs, the capacitors are very accessible, very obvious, and replacing them is not a big deal. And in that case, having a repair shop do that it would cost some money, but would be less than replacing the entire subwoofer for sure. There are some other subwoofer designs where there are capacitors on that circuit board somewhere, but it is like you're basically replacing the whole circuit board. It is not any sort of accessible thing where you can easily replace. It depends on the type of design. So I don't know exactly the design on this. Yeah. There's the possibility that this being a repair shop that was more familiar, they're like, yeah, with those amplifiers, we don't replace components on the circuit board. We just replace the whole circuit board. That's really all you can do. And at that point, you've replaced the driver, you've replaced the amplifier. The only thing you didn't replace is the cabinet. It's older, so maybe you can't get the direct replacement parts anymore, and you're sort of at the point where you might just buy a whole new subwoofer because the cost of bringing in this one-time part or sourcing it is going to end up costing more than just replacing it. That's not out of the question.
You got to remember, too, you may be, if you've ever done a project at home where you're like, I just need to change out the cover on this light switch. Right, and you find yourself with a massive hole in your drywall 5 hours later, and Googling a bunch of electrical stuff. This is what could be happening with yourself. They're going to be getting into this thing because all you want to have done is to have this surround replaced. Mm-hmm. But they are now, once they open that sub up, they are responsible. If they're smart, they will realize that they are responsible for anything else that may be wrong with the sub from that point forward. You're going to think that anything else that goes like, well, it was fine before you touched it, so therefore you must have broken something, right? It was fine before. And they're trying to tell you nicely, it's probably not worth it, because once they get into that thing, if they're smart, they'll fix everything that they can see that is wrong with it.
I mean, they should call you first, get your okay, just like a car dealership.
They should, but they gave you an estimate up to $360.
And that would be like, the $90 would be, all we did was replace the surround. Mm-hmm. The foam surround, that's all we did. The $360 would be like, turns out we have to replace the whole driver. But if they got in there and it's like, well, not only do we have to replace the whole driver, we need to replace the amp as well, is going to be more than $360 at that point.
And you got to remember too, I mean, they're taking screws out of a 24-year-old MDF design, enclosure. Who knows whether or not they're going to be able to get everything back in the way that it was originally there, and they may end up with just a sub in pieces going, we can't put this back together, not and have it be structurally intact. So they're giving you, I think, some good advice.
I'm not mad at them for that advice. Yeah.
You can make the decision yourself, but you have to go into this with your eyes open and say, listen, I may get to the end of this thing and have to pay them to try to fix it, because they should charge you. Pay them to try to fix it, and they may come back and say, well, we tried, but but
like
you
me
need a new sub.
Personally, with this type of thing, like I would be willing to say, replace the foam surround. Whatever you find, don't do anything else. But just go ahead, replace the foam surround. See how that goes. If there's any problems, I'm done with that sub. That would be me. But I would be willing to just stop at replace the foam surround.
Not all shops will do that, because many people say just do the one thing.
Sign whatever waiver.
But that doesn't make any difference. They still come back and complain and then give you bad reviews on
That's me.
Yelp
I wouldn't
whatever.
do that.
But everyone says they won't do that, Rob. Everyone says they won't. They won't do it. Yep. Everybody says they actually won't, but some of them do. So.
I know some of them do. Yes. That I agree.
Vince was pretty much prepared to pick up a LG C2 OLED, but he's noticed that they're finally starting to go out of stock at some stores. Naturally, the new C3 model is there to replace them. He's seen the review saying that if you can get a C2 at a discounted price, there really isn't enough of a difference to make it worth paying more for the C3, but that the plan is to use this OLED as a computer monitor and a gaming monitor. Is there actually any downside to getting the C3? I don't know.
So... Okay, I will say there's one very, very minor potential downside that the most persnickety gamers out there might point to, and literally only one. And that is, so last week, we talked about the whole going into the service menu of an LG OLED and turning off the TPC, the temporal, now I forget what it even stood for, but whatever it was, the thing that makes the image auto-dim, turning off the TPC inside the service menu, and the other one was the GSR, which I do remember, the global sticky reduction, because that's such a funny name, and turning those off in the service menu. So on the C3, on the new C3 and the new G3 this year, those options are not in the service menu anymore. Even if you go into the service menu, you cannot turn those things off. They are removed from the service menu. But the good news is that TPC thing that was responsible for the majority of the auto dimming, they fixed that so it doesn't do that anymore. So you don't have to turn it off. It's off by default. What is missing is the global sticky reduction. There's no option to turn that off, and there is still some global sticky reduction present on the C3 and the G3, with now no method of turning it off, even if you venture into the service menu. Now, the good news there is it's less aggressive than previous years. So it's much less noticeable. If you're playing a video game that has a heads-up display, there is, like, if you took a photo at the proper exposure at the beginning and a photo at the end, it would have dimmed that image a little bit by the end, thanks to that global sticky reduction and noticing the heads-up display on there. But it's really hard to notice with your eyes. It's not like the old one where it was pretty readily noticeable with your eyes. It's a lot less aggressive now on the C3 and the G3. So outside of that one little thing of the global sticky reduction being there and some persnickety gamers saying, oh, I want the ability to turn it completely off, and therefore I'm going to stick with the C2. The C3 is slightly better in other ways. The just above black, it's a little bit better there. The smooth gradation, it's a little bit better there. One really nice thing I like on the C3 that the C2 didn't have is to get 444 chroma working properly. On the C2, you had to go into the input menu and put it into PC mode. You had to say that this input is connected to a PC. You had to do that manually on the C2. On the C3, they now just have a activate 444 right in the picture settings, and you don't have to mess with putting it in PC mode anymore. And I really like that, and you're probably going to want to do that for your computer monitor services. So, is there any way that there's a downside to the C3? If you're worried about the global sticky reduction, that would be the one and only thing. Otherwise, it's better in every way.
Phenomenal. Nelson. So the big summer movies are coming out, and in Nelson's area, most of them will be showing in both his local IMAX theater and his local Dolby Cinema. The IMAX in this area is digital IMAX with a 1.9:1 aspect ratio screen. It is an IMAX with laser and a true large format IMAX. I don't even think I really want to see any movie in a true one. I mean, the wall that makes you dizzy every time something spins. It's stupid. But it does have excellent, properly calibrated sound every time he's gone there. Of course, Dolby Cinema is also very well calibrated, offering Dolby Vision and Atmos. They have their larger reclining seats, but the screen isn't as tall. So what would be our choice, and what would be our advice? Which of these two theater options is best for seeing the big summer blockbusters? Do you want my theoretical answer or my real answer? Because my theoretical answer is probably the Dolby Cinema. I think I would prefer. I don't care that the screen is not much bigger. I would care more about the sound, honestly, because you can change the size of the screen by sitting closer.
But it's the aspect ratio, Tom. The aspect
Whatever.
ratio.
I don't care that much about that. So for me, it would be that. The real answer is whichever one had the cheapest tickets at the time I wanted to see it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's what it would come down to. Because I think this is 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a good experience no matter what you do.
Oh, yes. Yeah. My answer would be, if I'm not already familiar with how the particular movie that I'm considering to go see, if I'm not already familiar with how it was shot, one handy thing is if you go to IMDb, you look up any movie, including ones that haven't even come out in the theater anymore. They're really good. You have to scroll down a ways, but there is a technical specs section on IMDb for every movie, and they list the aspect ratio, including if it has changing aspect ratios. They'll list both, like the Christopher Nolan movies, and they list what cameras it was shot on. So if it's a movie that is shot with IMAX certified cameras with IMAX aspect ratios, the 1.9 or the 2.0 or all the way up to the closer to square formats, if it's a movie that's shot that way, my personal preference is I'm going to go see it in the IMAX because I like having that taller screen when it was shot that way. And I don't like having it cropped down to 2.35 to 1. Of course, there's always a version that is cropped down to 2.35 to 1 because there's so many other theaters that are like that. But if it was shot on IMAX certified cameras in an IMAX aspect ratio, I want to go to the IMAX theater. Otherwise, my default would be the Dolby Cinema. So that's how I would decide.
Fair enough. JR, it's been a while since JR has written to us. About a year ago, he finished, quote unquote, his basement home theater with his computer set up at the back of the room. He wound up upgrading to Sonos Faber speakers for the main 5 channels. He kept a pair of surround back speakers. on stands behind the main couch, and he had 4 SVS Prime Elevation speakers for Atmos, plus a pair of PC2000 Pro cylinder subs. It was all driven by a Denon receiver with additional amplification attached. A 77-inch OLED served as a display, and he tricked out the room with lots of panels and bass traps from Gick Acoustics. He was very pleased with the results. This is all in the past tense.
Yes. So, shout out to Home Theater Tours. Those are our good friends, Ara from the HT guys and DJ from Brightside Home Theater. They did a tour with DJ, so I borrowed images from their YouTube video, because that was actually the link that JR sent for, like, here's the images, is this tour that we did. So that's where I snapped those, and that's why it has the HT Tours logo down in the bottom right corner when I'm showing these, and there we go. You can have a look around this theater. It's very nice looking. But yes, all past tense, Tom, all past tense.
Okay. But now they are moving. The new house has a finished basement, but they are going to do some renovations down there to make most of it into an apartment for his daughter, with a section closed off to act as a dedicated home theater. We don't love you that much. You don't get to sleep. We're going to have a home theater right next to you. Sucks to be you. That's what you get for living for free.
That's right.
Freeloader. That's right. Oh, my God. The photos JR has provided are just from the listing of for the house, so it's a bit of explanation is needed. The first room we are seeing, so if you're on the Flickr album or the YouTube channel, good luck. Because
it is useful. This is kind of hard to describe without seeing what we're talking about.
Yeah. The first one we're seeing with the foosball table in the middle of it will be part of his daughter's apartment in the background. So there's like a soffit across the top, and then like a slight bump ins for the walls on either side.
But that's all going to be part of the apartment, not part of the theater.
Right. We can see that a door that leads outside that is going to remain accessible to the apartment. So on the back left wall, whatever, there's a double door that you
down in the background there. That's leading outside. That's going to be how you get into the apartment without having to go through the main floor of the house.
So the biggest part of the renovation will be constructing a wall 3 feet in front of the exterior door. This new wall will be 14 feet wide, and it will create the front wall of the new dedicated home theater room. So there will be a 14-foot hallway, 3 feet wide, giving the apartment access to the exterior door. So you'll walk into this door, there'll be a wall in front of you. You'll make a right, and you'll go back towards the apartment. This hallway will be 14 feet long.
That's right.
So when you trap people down there, they'll have to run all the way down there, and you'll be able to get good shots of them being scared as you're chasing them with a machete.
Uh-huh. And directly on the other side of that wall, as soon as you come through that exterior door, that's the front wall of the theater.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
In this next photo, which you cannot see unless you're listening to this thing, anyway, the exterior door is just out of frame on the left, and there's some couches there. We see a stairs at the back and a 10-foot wide opening just behind the pool table where there's a bar installed. Okay, whatever. I don't care anymore. I'm scrolling. There's the bar. It looks like a bar. It's also a little refrigerator. And it's Labatt's blue, which we've got to get rid of that. The plan is for the bar to be at the back of the home theater room, and a new wall will be constructed perpendicular to the bottom of the stairs. So basically, where we see the pool table and the bar, that will all get closed in with a new front wall, a new left wall, and that will make the theater room about 14 feet wide, except for the bar area at the back, which is about 10 feet wide. And about 20 feet long, including the bar area. And overall, the theater room will be a bit of an L shape because the bar area at the back not being as wide as the rest of the theater room at the front. So, whatever. It's an enclosed room, right? That's right. An enclosed room. That's all
it is enclosed. The theater will be enclosed, yes.
And it's kind of L-ish, but not really, because it's...
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like a short square room and then the bar at the back.
Yeah. So we'll notice that in front of the bar area, there's a wide soffit that covers the return air duct, and there's a support column. JR is envisioning that this couch will go basically directly beneath that soffit. As such, he won't be able to perfectly replicate his current setup, which has front heights and top middle speakers. If we were to mount his top middle speakers on the front soffit in the new house, they'd be in front of his seats, and if we were to mount them on the side walls, it'd be kind of low because of the soffit. So his best option to have front heights and rear heights. I thought that was your best option to begin with. I said, if you're doing this whole thing over again, top middles are not the way to go. So front heights and rear heights is,
it made sense
better
in his old setup because he had a significant amount of room behind him where his computer was in the old setup. But in this new setup, that isn't so much the case.
Yeah.
In the new setup, I absolutely think front heights, rear heights makes sense.
Yes.
I agree. That's a simple answer. That's it.
Is there some sort of perfect ratio for the length versus the width of the theater room? They have some control and flexibility when it comes to constructing the exact dimensions of the new front and left walls of the theater. So should he be aiming for something specific? There are. There are.
I mean, kinda.
But I will be honest with you, big as possible is what I would go for. I mean,
You make the theater as big as you physically can.
Dude, you're going to get 2 subs. You're going to acoustically treat this room. Screw the perfect dimensions because they really don't make nearly as much difference as having 2 properly placed subs and room treatments. You're going to have those 2 things big as possible. Every inch you can.
You aren't making a perfect rectangle anyway, so even the calculators, because I'll have a link to the calculator. There's the room mode calculator, and you can go through that, and you can enter various dimensions and see if the little crosshairs show up within the target range or not. And spoiler alert, for any of the dimensions you might put in for this basement room, because the ceiling is kind of low, they won't. You'll never get that target inside of the target range, so just don't worry about it too much. But no, I mean, the realistic answer is you just make the interior of the theater as large as you reasonably can, and these calculations are not going to be accurate anyway because it's not a perfect rectangle.
Yeah. So thankfully, full soundproofing is not the goal. They'll be perfectly fine with the amount of sound transfer that normal wall construction will allow. That's because we don't want the daughter to stay.
Apparently.
Get out. Listen, we already paid all the money we're supposed to pay for you. You freeloader.
Seems like.
Can you tell that I have kids in college and then I have one kid in college and one about to go to college? He's a year off, but boy, I can taste it. Get out. Changing the locks. Anyways. He's much more concerned about the acoustics inside the theater room, so he'll be bringing all of his GIC acoustic panels with him. But since they're building 2 new walls no matter what, aside from soundproofing, is there any advantage to building staggered stud walls? And for installation inside the new walls, is there any reason to spend more than just the basic pink stuff? No advantage, and just use the pink stuff.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. The pink stuff is totally fine. Not usually that much of a difference to get rock soul, but in some locations it is, so I understand that. If you're doing this yourself, I will say the rock soul is easier to work with, and that might be worth its difference in price. But if you're having a contractor do this, then they're absolutely fine putting in the pink stuff. None of these should be exterior walls, so we shouldn't be having any worries about moisture, right? Because both of these will be completely interior, non-load-bearing walls, so none of that should be a concern. So yeah, pink stuff is totally fine. The staggered stud is definitely about soundproofing, so if you really have no soundproofing concerns, then there isn't some kind of structural advantage.
I'm gonna say though that you should use insulation in all the walls. I think that you should use acoustic putty or whatever it is for the outlets
around the outlets.
And you should do the solid core door. I mean, it's not that much. That's not that much money.
Yeah,
and not that much difference. In sonically, like my parents, I was just complaining with my parents. They're like, they put solid core doors trying to stop sound transfer from one room to the other. I'm like, well, that's not enough. I mean, it's something. It's not nothing.
Something. It reduces some.
I think that if you just put some insulation in the interior walls that you're going to put up, which just normally happen, I would worry a little bit about heating and cooling in this space, though.
Well, yes, that is my bigger concern about all of this, because you got to have. I mean, ventilation even more than heating and cooling. You cannot have no ventilation.
Right.
So let's just make sure you've got a way for air to get in and out of both the new theater and the apartment. Because if they were, because this is an open space the way it is now.
Your contractor should deal with all of that. They should.
Well,
they should.
You can't always not consider it. So yes, I mean, I want to make sure there's a way for air to get in and out of both of these spaces. That is vitally important. I certainly want climate control for both of those spaces too, which usually comes hand in hand with the ventilation, but not always. Right. So that is my bigger concern here. As long as we've got that, as long as there are registers and air returns for both separated areas, then I'm happy to do this. But if you haven't considered that, consider it, because it is very important.
And if your new house does not have like zones or whatever for these things, I would we've talked about getting a mini split for just your home theater. If the insulation in the walls is going to make this room's temperature more stable. It's going to stay the same, which means when you put a projector in here, if that's what you do, or even an OLED or any, anything, any heat source in here.
The amplifiers that he has, they're pouring heat out there.
They're gonna warm this room up, and it's gonna stay warm compared to the rest of the house. Like, I'll give you an example. In my house, like, the AC could be off, right? Completely off. And I open the door to the home theater after we've been watching the movie. The heat rushes out of here, and boom, the AC immediately turns on in the house because it warms up the rest of the house that much. Yeah. And that's just with the projector. I don't really have a bunch of amps in here. Yeah. So really think about making sure that this particular room has its own climate control system, because I think that'll make a big difference. And putting all that insulation in the walls, I mean, it's just going to create a room that is more stable in temperature than the rest of the house. And then you're going to put a bunch of heat sources in it. So
That's right.
Unless you like being hot.
Including you, the viewer. You
Yes,
throw off
that
heat.
is true. That is true. We'll do one more. Mike. 4 years ago, Mike got a JVC RS540 projector. It looked fantastic, but fairly recently it started having very noticeable brightness fluctuations. And then the green channel stopped working entirely, making everything discolored. Although with 1080p content specifically, it would seem to fix itself sometimes, then flake out again as soon as any 4K content was shown. He was told by a local repair shop that the green channel issue meant that there was a problem with the light engine itself, and it would be very costly to fix, close to just buying a whole new projector. So when they had an upgrade to a brand new RS 2100, which is the same as the NZ7. Excuse me. It's a noticeable upgrade from its RS540, so he doesn't really regret the purchase at all, but he does feel bad that his 540 only lasted 4 years and doesn't really want to trash it. He doesn't have any intention of paying the high price for his local repair shop to fix it, but he's fairly familiar with working on electronics himself. So is there anything he might be able to do on his own? If he could just get it working again, he could use it in another room rather than just get rid of it altogether. I mean, dude, if you have to ask the question, I think the answer is no. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, like, where I know how to change the brakes on my car, but if somebody were to say, "Can you change the brakes on my car, on their car?"
No, yeah,
I would be like,
yeah.
Especially if you start talking about rotors. Like, I can get brake pads on. All right, I know how that works. But you start talking about rotors and stuff, and things get dicey pretty fast for me. So
yeah, this to me would be a case of I don't know how to diagnose this properly, what's actually causing this issue. Like, if this is anything to do with, so in the JVC projectors, it is a 3-chip system. You have 3 separate chips, one for red each, red, green, and blue. So if it's any sort of problem with the chip itself, there's no way you're fixing that yourself. Absolutely none. Yeah. The only thing that you might possibly be able to do yourself would be if this is just some sort of controller circuit board issue, and it's like you can take some ribbon cables off, maybe some soldering involved with removing the old circuit board and finding and replacing that circuit board. If it's a controller chip issue, it's not out of the realm of possibility. If you're pretty good with electronics, that is something I could conceive of you maybe doing. But certainly if it's anything to do with the chip itself, the green chip itself, there's nothing you're going to do yourself on that one. So I don't know how to tell you how to properly diagnose exactly what's going on there, but that is the only thing I could conceive of if it's the controller chip on its own. This being only 4 years old, I would get in touch with JVC.
Yeah.
I know you're past the 3-year warranty technically, but this isn't right. 4 years is too short. It should last longer than 4 years for a problem like this. I would definitely get in touch with them. I would not be rude, but I would stick there and, like, they're going to agree. This is too short. It's not, you shouldn't have the green channel is just cutting out on your projector after only 4 years. Something is wrong there. So I would kind of insist.
So you've upgraded, right?
And oh, sure. I'm just saying, get it repaired, sell it, that type of thing. Like, it should last more than 4 years. That's not right.
Yeah, I agree with Rob. I would talk to them. 4 years does seem a little short to me.
Oh yeah.
We get this kind of idea that certain products lasted a really long time, and we've got, my dad's got his Sony projector that lasted a bajillion years. You're like, yeah, and for every one of those, there's 200 of them that are in the landfill someplace after breaking after a year and a half. So but it doesn't hurt anything at this point. You already got your new projector, which is going to be great. And you could, like Rob said, just contact them and say, hey, this is what happened. This is what the repair shop said it was going to cost more than a new projector. Don't tell them that you upgraded.
I guess, yeah.
Just say, is there anything that you can do, or what can I do to get this fixed, or what might be the problem, and see what they say. Worst case scenario, they'd say nothing. And in which case you're in the exact same boat that you're in right now.
That's right. Yeah.
So if they say something, then you may end up with a projector that's fixed, like Rob said, you can sell or that you can use.
Yeah. Because that's abnormally short, and it's not the norm for JVC projector. We don't have a bunch of JVC owners telling us, oh yeah, they only last 4 or 5 years, and then it's just the projector's done. No, that's not right. Yeah. That ain't right.
Let's do one more. Rob.
Yeah.
Rob appreciated us covering how to get his LG CX OLED to stop auto-dimming its image and getting stuck looking far too dim, which apparently we can't stop talking about. Mm-hmm. He ordered that LG service remote right away. Do we have a recap we can point to for best settings for gaming on his CX OLED with his Xbox Series X? I'm sure there's somebody out there who's done that. So,
boy, do we ever. Yes. Vincent Teo over at HDTV Test, my favorite TV reviewer and tech person when it comes to televisions. I mean, boy, oh boy, does he have what you're looking for, because it is specifically Xbox Series X settings with an LG C9 or C10 OLED. You cannot get any more specific. He has a video exactly about your setup and covers both the settings in the LG C10 OLED and in the Xbox Series X itself, so you cannot beat it. He also has a link that goes into even more detail on the Xbox Series X specifically, some more settings that you might change in there for things other than gaming, right? For your streaming services, for your disc playback and that type of thing that it can do. So he's got all the resources there. I'll have the link to exactly what you're looking for. Just to point out a couple of things right off the top, there is that whole thing of the Xbox Series X absolutely can output games at 444 or RGB, and to support that is putting your OLED's input into that PC mode. So that's one of the things that's covered in there to get that full 444 chroma or RGB compatibility. There is one tip, which is on the LG OLEDs. This is not so much the case on the newer ones, but it was for the C9, C10 generations. They have the ability to work with AMD FreeSync if you're connecting a computer graphics card that has AMD FreeSync. If you turn on FreeSync specifically, it will deactivate Dolby Vision, which your Xbox Series X is capable of doing with gaming. It is not necessary to have FreeSync on for VRR, variable refresh rate, to work, because there is the regular HDMI forum variable refresh rate version that the Xbox Series X supports, and so does your C10 OLED. So you do not have to turn on FreeSync for VRR to work. And in fact, you want to keep it off in order to keep Dolby Vision working. And then this is a thing that just broadly, LG OLEDs support HGIG, which is the High Dynamic Range Gaming Interest Group. And the whole idea there is, instead of having the television doing any tone mapping to a HDR game signal whatsoever, instead of it doing even just basic tone mapping, right? In comes a 2000 nit signal with metadata and it tone maps out. Nope. HGIG turns completely all of the tone mapping in the television off 100%, and you can access that in the dynamic tone mapping setting on your LG OLED. You can go into the picture settings and turn that to, it's even labeled HGIG. And then the Xbox Series X has a HDR calibration thing to go through, and it actually works. It actually works when you put it in HGIG mode, and you can even follow the instructions on screen without it messing anything up, which is kind of a rarity. The whole system actually works when it's implemented properly. So those are some fun things you can do with your Xbox Series X and LG OLED.
So Rob is using a Denon X4400H, which is the same receiver I have. It's a little old. He's been patiently waiting for all the HDMI 2.1 nonsense to get sorted out, and now he wants a receiver that can switch between HDMI 2.1 sources and handle all of the high-end gaming stuff, 4K 120 with VRR, Dolby Vision, and lossless audio. Is it finally a good time to upgrade his receiver? Is there a particular brand or model that has the best optimization for gaming? I mean, the idea between, so optimization for gaming, all it's got to do is pass things through. Right?
Yeah, easier said than done, though, Tom.
Yeah,
we know this.
We know that, right? All it's got to do is pass things through. The fact that they haven't been able to figure this, or they're having a hard time figuring this out, is irritating.
It sure is.
It really depends. Like, it seems like, is it now a good time? I don't know, because like stuff like QMS, which we've talked about before, the quick media switching, and some of these other features that are HDMI 2.1 specific, are not available yet.
Not 100% yet? No.
Yeah. So are you, is it really a good time to buy a receiver right now? Well, it's better time It's better than a
much
year.
better than it used to be.
Yeah,
Much better.
it's better than a year ago. It's better when Denon and Yamaha were like, we're totally gonna come up with a solution for this HDMI 2.0, and they didn't. Well, it Denon did, and Yamaha's were like, send your receiver in, and we'll totally, kind of, sort of, halfway fix it. So, you waited a while. Can you wait a little bit longer? Can you wait a little?
I don't think he
year?
has to. I don't think it's
if it's just the gaming stuff, then
Yeah.
But if you're gonna be like in a year, be like, oh my god, they came out with now suddenly all this other stuff works that it can't work on my whatever Denon or Marantz. And yes, I think you should stick with Denon.
Yep.
I don't see any reason for you to switch.
No, my advice would be to stick with the Denon. So I mean, yeah, you are looking at like probably an X3800, right? To replicate the channel count that you have with your X4400H, to replicate all the features you already have, and then add the ability to switch between HDMI 2.1 sources. You'll also have the option to go ahead and add to rack for an add-on price if you want to. You've got the 4 subwoofer outputs, one of which can be a tactile transducer dedicated output. So, there's some nice feature upgrades in going to an X3800H, but the main thing is, yes, it supports as well as any AV receiver does at the moment all of the HDMI 2.1 features that are currently out there. Denon is doing that. Can't say the same thing about everybody else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would stick with the Denon. I would almost certainly point you to an X3800H.
I feel comfortable saying that as well. I think that's going to be it, right?
I believe so. Yeah, the next one's fairly long, and we're at 2 hours, so there we go.
There we go. So who
I
we
will
got
say,
left?
yeah, Steven in Australia has sent in a question with some nice images. I'm so envious of these people who have these really nicely decorated, organized, clean homes. I'm like, my place never looks like that. Just never, ever looks like that.
You live alone with no animals. I don't know what your excuse is.
It's small. I got too much stuff and not enough time.
You
That's
can
the
sell
problem.
some of that stuff or get rid
Oh,
of
can
it.
I now? It's that easy.
That's theoretically possible.
Anyway, Steven's on the list. Francis is on the list. Stan and Jay are on the list. You guys will be first up next week.
All right, I want to thank our listeners of the week. I want to thank Steven for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 132 patrons over at patreon.com.
That is right, Steven. Thank you so much for the PayPal donation, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation to us. So a big thanks to our 132 patrons over there.
I want to thank those who sent in notes thanking us. We've got Vince H., Paul, Vince F., Steven, Stan, and Rohan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Vince H., Paul, Vince F., Steven, Stan, and Rohan, thank you all very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We definitely appreciate it, and a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
All right, and if you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.